light the shadow that has so dogged my steps on the brightest days." This simple yet enigmatic phrase served as both mantra and motto for Harold Black, the man more commonly known as the Researcher. Nearly every hunter who has ever faced the horrors of the Louisiana event owe their lives to knowledge gathered by Mr. Black's tireless efforts. His fearless determination in seeking out any scrap of information that might aid those who face the darkness that threatens our world, making his name practically a byword within the American Hunters Association. This wasn't always the case, however, and it's clear from the earliest entries in his research journals that Harold Black would never have become the man we know today had he never encountered the terrifying creature known to hunters simply as the Assassin. Though most of this monster's physical form seems to consist of little more than a cloud-like swarm of shifting, writhing insects, the true appearance of the Assassin could be mistaken for that of an incredibly tall, gaunt man wearing a long, tattered coat, so long as it keeps to the shadows at least. Though superficially humanoid in shape, not even the darkness could disguise the signs of the sculptor's corrupting touch when faced with this creature. Pale, cadaverous skin clings obscenely to a nearly skeletal body, made all the more grotesque by the ragged, hollowed-out cavity which encompasses the entire abdominal region. Long, blade-like protrusions of incredibly hard material, with an appearance very similar to bone, extend from specialized openings at the wrist of each withered hand, which the Assassin utilizes as its primary weapon of attack. These blades can even be launched at a victim from a distance, with no apparent limitation as to how many it can produce, regrowing time and time again, as often as needed until the monster's bloody task is complete. Though most of the internal organs are absent, visible just behind the ribcage is an organic mass which appears to be a new organ of some sort, modified from the mass of organic matter which was once the heart, liver, and upper respiratory system. Closer inspection of this organ-like mass reveals that nearly every available centimeter of the surface is covered in holes of various sizes, the entire upper internal structure of the creature having been converted into something resembling an enormous hive as a means of maintaining the trademark insect swarms which enshroud it. It can be reasonably assumed this hive-like structure extends all the way up through the neck and into the skull itself, as observation of the area where the face had once been reveals nothing more than a blasted-out crater in its place, the entire inner surface lined with more openings for the swarm, from which the monster is capable of creating clones of itself to confound its prey in the darkness, while the true assassin waits to strike for the kill. It was into this empty, blackened space where a face should have been that a younger, more inexperienced Harold Black found himself staring one ill-fated day in the corridors of the recently abandoned Nichols prison, standing amid the slaughtered bodies of his comrades, frozen by the horrible recognition he saw there before turning and fleeing for his life. The encounter would forever charge Mr. Black with a sense of purpose and focus he had lacked his entire life, driven by the need to research all he could of this evil monster in order to be sure that it would be destroyed for good. If we want to truly understand what he saw that terrible day, and by extension, the mystery behind the assassin, we need to go back and take a closer look at the man Harold Black was before he ever took on the mantle of hunter. Back to the Harold Black who dropped out of college to pursue a career as a writer, though without much success, only to find himself working for a New Orleans newspaper during the infamous events surrounding David Hennessy's assassination in the autumn of 1890. Black was witness to the lynch mob which had stormed the prison after a series of mistrials and acquittals following the murder, and it was as he moved to abandon the repulsive spectacle that he first spotted an unusually, almost unnaturally tall figure standing at the edge of the crowd. Disgusted though he was at the proceedings around him, Black couldn't help but notice that the figure appeared incredibly agitated as it turned to make its own exit, something which compelled the curious man to follow. It didn't take long for Harold's less than stealthy pursuit to catch the attention of his quarry, which suddenly sparked into both the follower and the followed, sprinting at full speed when the sound of a gunshot rang out from the prison behind them. Just as the dead end of an alleyway seemed to put an end to the tall figure's flight, a quick kick from the cornered man launched a plume of dust, grit, and the crawling shape of a single beetle directly into Black's face, much to his disgust. Even as he cleared his vision, he was greeted with what seemed like an impossible sight. The tall, mysterious figure appeared to be climbing the sheer wall of the building in front of them, hanging on without any obvious means of purchase. With a flick of his wrist, the figure sent a long, thin blade flying toward Mr. Black, barely missing him and thudding into the ground at his feet. Understandably, he ran from that alley as quickly as he could, leaving the strange figure as it vanished up over the roof of the building. Harold's position with the newspaper would not long survive his experience at the prison that fateful day, leaving him without definite employment until he eventually took on a position in the offices of the then Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana, a man by the name of Hiram R. Lott. Though this work was steady and he enjoyed a position of trust and respect with his employer, Black seemed to find little satisfaction in the tedium of his clerical duties and spent much of his personal time drinking himself into a stupor. It was during this hazy period of Harold Black's life that he came to make the chance acquaintance of a one Vincent Orsica, who, though many years Harold's senior, grew to be one of the man's dearest friends and closest companions over the next year, often drinking and smoking entire nights away in each other's company. Vincent seemed to almost take on the role of a trusted uncle or older brother with Harold as their friendship grew, offering advice to the younger man and inviting Harold to speak freely whenever there had been a new argument at work, especially if it involved his employer, Mr. Lott. They never needed to make an appointment with each other, as Vincent would simply always manage to find him, no matter what smoke-filled establishment or back alley drinking house he found himself in each night. In fact, it wasn't until quite some time into their friendship that Harold would see the man sober for the first time, only to note just how incredibly tall his friend happened to be, the only real description of the man ever put in writing. Out of apparent concern for Harold's questionable health, the two friends began taking long walks out into the local woods at Vincent's insistence, even going so far as practicing a bit of sport shooting at times, which eventually developed into the larger expeditions and nighttime hunts, which Harold would come to credit for his good health later in life. The last time Mr. Black ever remembered speaking to Vincent Orsica was during yet another long night filled with whiskey and cigarettes, during which Harold regaled his companion with the tale of his newfound state of unemployment. As always, Vincent was deeply interested in any conversations between Harold and his employer, and so listened attentively as the man detailed Mr. Lott's interest in a canal built through Nicaragua, an interest he had decided to take directly to the project and out of the country, leaving New Orleans without a lieutenant governor, and Harold Black without a job. They parted ways at dawn, and Black's last bleary memory of their parting seemed so surreal to the man that he was sure that it must have been the drink. Vincent appeared to split into several copies of himself, each making its way down a different alley. Sometime later, after learning of the sudden and unexpected death of his previous employer, a thoroughly besotted Harold Black would eventually cross paths with the shadowy world of magic and murder within the American Hunters Association. Through his newfound connection with a hunter by the name of Samson, Harold would join up with a group of young hunters with whom he came to learn the ins and outs of his bloody new profession. They would eventually find themselves stalking the darkened corridors of Nichols Prison, hunting down the rumors of a new and deadly threat in the area. Little did they realize that they had become the prey the moment they entered the building. The assassin cut its way through Harold Black's companions with terrifying ease, utilizing the full complement of its unnatural abilities to blind, confound, and slaughter the hopeless hunters while Harold choked and struggled with a wave of insects crawling over his face and down his throat. Before there was anything else he could do, Harold was alone against the towering shape in the dark, staring into an empty crater where a face should have been, reeling in horror over the terrible, impossible sight that met his eyes. Vincent Orsica was within that dark emptiness, and the recognition sent Harold careening out of the prison, heedless of anything but escaping into the sunlight. It was that very moment, when the warm rays of the sun washed over him, that he realized he was no longer the man he had been when he first entered those shadowy corridors. Never again would he lose a comrade like that. Never again would he let a fellow hunter walk blindly into their own slaughter when he could arm them with the knowledge to survive. He would start by learning everything he could about Vincent Orsica. Harold Black would eventually uncover everything revealed here through frantic investigation and feverish dedication to the task of learning everything he could about this mysterious figure who seemed to have dogged his footsteps for far longer than he had ever realized. Discovering that Vincent had lived in a sparsely furnished room overlooking the site of those terrible lynchings back during Black's short-lived stint in journalism. It wasn't much of a leap in logic to surmise that Vincent had, in fact, been the tall figure capable of such impossible feats of climbing whom Harold had chased that bizarre day. Every possible source of information, every journal entry, every single piece of data that could shed even the smallest scrap of light on this shadowy, inhuman assassin was gathered through tireless research, until, finally, Harold Black was ready to face it once more and destroy it once and for all. He would never get the chance, however. His companions had grown to depend on Black's research skills, and no longer believed it was worth the risk of losing him in combat against such a terrible monster. Instead, they would ask him to take up a permanent role as researcher to the AHA, a role he would, in his own words, ashamedly accept. A good thing too, as his research has, without any doubt, saved countless hunters from a terrible death in the darkness of the Louisiana Bayou. In many ways, the assassin represents a change to how the sculptor's influence altered those corrupted by its touch. While all of the twisted creations encountered are a serious threat to anyone who happens to cross their path, none of the presumed intended functions of the other forms of monsters have been specifically inclined toward violent assault, their inherent danger to the living being more of a side effect to their transformed state than anything else. The unique shape and skills of the assassin, however, would appear explicitly tuned toward the task of terrorizing and destroying human beings. What's more, the human Vincent Orsica seemed to have possessed at least some of the trademark abilities of the monstrous assassin as early as 1890, leaving us with the very real, very chilling possibility that he may have had a more direct relationship to the Louisiana event than anyone realizes. Now watch this video to learn about the tortured transformation of the Immolator, or check out the full playlist for more monstrous lore from the Hunt Showdown universe.